Good morning and welcome to News Now on this Tuesday morning. We're going to get started with some political news. U.S. Attorney General William Barr is on Capitol Hill today. It's his first appearance since the Mueller report summary was released. Fox correspondent Doug Luzader had more from Washington this morning.
The dispute over the Mueller report going to break wide open on Capitol Hill.
Attorney General William Barr will be there fielding questions from Democrats. And Doug, I'm sure one of the things they're going to want to say is, let us see the report.
Let us see the report and also let us see the whole report, not redacted portions. There's going to be a big debate over this. This is actually supposed to be a pretty boring hearing in theory because this is a budget hearing. It's the kind of thing we wouldn't normally pay all that much attention to, but because of the Mueller report, there are going to be a lot of fireworks today.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr will head to Capitol Hill today. We know what he wants to talk about, the $30 billion budget for his sprawling department. But Democrats will want to focus on the Russian collusion report from special counsel Robert Mueller that is still in Barr's hands.
It's almost impossible to ignore it.
Chairman Jose Serrano and his fellow Democrats will no doubt pepper Barr with questions about the 4-page summary of the Mueller report that he put together. It more or less exonerated the president over allegations of collusion and argued that Trump and others should not be prosecuted amidst mixed evidence of obstruction of justice.
Looking at 300-odd pages, and he comes up with what he came up with. How did he reach that conclusion?
Republicans have defended Barr, who they point out is required to redact certain portions of the Mueller report before it is turned over to Congress in coming days.
Obviously, we realize that, but, you know, the report is going to be delivered in a week or so. I mean, I know the time limit is said mid-April. And then number two is the Attorney General is bound by law. He can only do what requires him by law to produce that document.
Either way, President Trump is fed up with Democrats in Congress who are using their new House majority to launch one investigation after another. Writing on Twitter, the Democrats will never be satisfied. No matter what they get, how much they get, or how many pages they get, it will never end. But that's the way life goes.
And for the Attorney General, William Barr, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. He's going to be back here before Congress a couple of times early next month to specifically talk about the Mueller report. And at that point, in theory at least, the report, at least a redacted portion of it, should have been turned over to Congress. Back to you guys.
We'll certainly see what the day brings. The grilling, though, it's sure to come. All right, Doug, thank you. 7:13.
And developing now, 3 U.S. soldiers and a U.S. contractor were killed when their convoy hit a roadside bomb. It happened yesterday in Afghanistan near a U.S. base north of Kabul. The Taliban is claiming responsibility for the attack. 3 others were hurt in the explosion and are being treated for their injuries. The names of those service members killed are being withheld until after their families are notified. Also in national news, a terror plot is foiled after officials in Maryland arrest a man who was planning the attack. Officials say the 28-year-old Rondell Henry planned to drive a truck into a crowd of people at National Harbor in Maryland. It's a popular tourist destination and entertainment complex right outside of Washington. Initially, law enforcement was investigating Henry for a stolen U-Haul. That's when they discovered a more serious crime.
The officers, instead of just handling that as a stolen vehicle, looked deeper and began to collaborate amongst Montgomery County, the City of Alexandria, our officers, then bringing the FBI to the table.
Investigators found Henry, who was from Germantown, Maryland, planned to use that stolen U-Haul during his attack. Prosecutors say Henry told officers he planned to, quote, just keep driving and didn't plan on stopping. Yesterday, prosecutors filed a motion to detain Henry pending a trial. And in political news, more top-level Trump administration officials are leaving under pressure. Secret Service Director Randolph Ailes was fired yesterday due to a reported personality conflict within the agency. James Murray, a career Secret Service member, will take over. He starts next month. In addition to Ailes, the Citizenship and Immigration Services Director, DHS General Counsel, and the Undersecretary for Management are also out.
Light observation aircraft into a modern air and maritime fleet equipped with sophisticated surveillance sensors and communication systems. We are working to increase the connectivity and networking among all our air and marine assets. We're also continuing the effort to reduce the number of our aircraft types and position our assets for highest utilization, which will increase both the efficiency and effectiveness of our operations. I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight a few of our key assets and describe how technology is an invaluable force multiplier that furthers
And we're sorry about that rogue clip there. Moving on to business. The robot takeover is on. We've told you about these robots now roaming the aisles of giant stores. Now, another major retailer is increasing its robot workforce. Fox Business's Tracy Carrasco has more.
So we've seen recently the supermarket chain Giant. They've been using robots in their stores, and a lot of people have been freaking out about it. I always see pictures, people posting videos. Oh, look at this.
It's a little unusual when you go in there, but they're scanning the aisles, looking for spills, making sure that the shelves are stocked.
But they may not be the only ones. Now Walmart is announcing that they're adding thousands of robots to their locations as well. So let's talk to Tracy. What will these robots be doing?
Robot takeover?
Yeah.
Yes, well, Walmart has been testing this out, and the tests have gone well, so they are expanding this. They are adding thousands of robots to stores around the world. The robots are going to be doing things like scrubbing the floors, scanning the store shelves for inventory. They're going to be unloading merchandise from delivery trucks and getting them sorted out. So they're going to be doing all of that manual labor, a lot of tasks that Walmart says it's really hard to keep workers doing that stuff, to consistently have the workers staffed for those types of jobs. They do have a lot of turnover. They're hoping that these robots will help with the turnover there. And these are jobs that are typically done overnight during the overnight hours, and that's another tough thing for workers too. So with this, they want those workers instead to be out on the floor, to be helping customers, to be doing other things within the store. So this is a good move, I guess, for Walmart to cut on those labor costs. They don't say anything about getting rid of human jobs, humans who actually do these things right now. So I think it's just a matter of shifting their positions. But this is a signal that this is the future for Walmart. They're going to be looking at other things that robots can do, I'm sure.
This is the future.
Yeah, they want it to be more customer focused. I don't know. Can you imagine walking in, seeing the robot, welcome to Walmart?
But I will admit, sometimes it's so big, trying to find someone if you have a question or to ask something, and they're so busy. So I kind of like the idea of maybe they'll have more time to help with customers.
Yeah. Soon you're going to be able to talk to the robot. That's the next phase.
Right.
They'll be able to help you out.
Or maybe check out with the robots. You don't have to wait in those long lines. That's also another idea.
All right, Tracy, thank you. Walmart has a very special place in my heart.
Oh, really?
I worked there years ago.
Really?
Yeah, I was a greeter, and then I worked in
paper
goods and chemicals, and I did the nightly announcements.
The Walmart nightly announcements?
Attention Walmart shoppers, the time is now 9:45, and your friendly Walmart discount center will be closing in 15 minutes. We ask at this time you bring your final selections to the front of the store, where our friendly cashiers are waiting to assist you. Our store hours are, and then you go through the store hours. Once again, thank you for shopping at your friendly Walmart discount center.
Well done.
Thank you.
That was amazing.
And moving on to weather this morning with your Fox 29 Weather Authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for another warm and cloudy day Tuesday. The region will see some early morning breaks in the overcast skies of an otherwise cloudy day. Temperatures will reach a high of 72 degrees. A stray shower or thunderstorm is also possible in the afternoon. Here we have a look at current temperatures in the region. We have a mild 49 degrees in Toms River, 55 in Atlantic City, 53 in Wildwood, and slightly higher temps in Lancaster with 66, 67 in Reading, and a mild 57 degrees in Mount Pocono. And looking ahead to your 7-day forecast. Again, Mild afternoon shower expected Tuesday. Wednesday we'll see a temperature dip with highs expected in the low 60s, though there will be more sunshine. And precipitation returns to the forecast by Friday with some late day rain. Temperatures will shoot back up to the 70s at that point, continuing into the weekend. Sun returns on Saturday, and a chance of showers returns on Sunday. And hopefully those April showers won't stick around for Monday for the Phillies. And don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 29 Weather Authority app to have the latest forecast. And moving on to local news. Video so disturbing, we cannot show you all of it. You see a little boy standing on the pole outside of a Dairy Queen on Lansdowne Avenue in Upper Darby. Here's that video now. And right after, he takes a few steps out onto the parking lot, and a red car comes barreling in and hits him.
Instead of just making a U-turn and heading back to the gas station, it makes a U-turn, then turns again and goes right into the parking lot of the Dairy Queen.
Police say the woman told them she tried to hit the brake, but the brake didn't work. This is the damage to the car, now at the police station waiting for inspection. The 8-year-old boy is at CHOP in critical condition, but now was in critical condition, but now is stable. Dairy Queen says it's collecting money and toys for the child. Also in local news, a vigil was held last night for a 4-year-old boy who's in critical condition after a fire took the lives of his father and brother. Ralph Freeman and his 7-year-old son, James Comager, were killed Sunday morning in an apartment fire on West 2nd Street in Chester. Last night, candles lit up the street outside their burned-down apartment as friends and family came together to mourn. Freeman's 4-year-old son, Jeremiah, remains in critical condition at CHOP. And in Delaware County, a crash when a car is crushed by a train. It happened yesterday in Lansdowne. SEPTA says Crossing Arms came down for an outbound train that passed and stayed down for an inbound train. That's when 2 drivers decided to go around the arms. A woman in a 3rd car did the same, but she got struck by the train. She remains in critical condition. Also in local news, neighbors found the body of a 54-year-old, Paul Haff, in a Williamstown neighborhood Sunday. Officials say he jumped from 7,000 feet up with a group of fellow divers.
Seen a body laying there with a parachute, and his shoes was over here, and the guys, it was kind of gory, you know what I mean, for little kids or whatever, but it was traumatic, you know.
He loved it. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted me to do it. For fun.
The Gloucester County Prosecutor's Office says Hoff had jumped more than 1,000 times before. The FAA is investigating. Also in Delaware County, the oldest reform school in the country just lost its licenses after numerous allegations of abuse. State officials have now revoked all of the Glen Mills school's licenses. Last month, the state ordered the removal of all Glen Mills students as it investigates allegations of decades of physical and verbal abuse at the school for at-risk boys. Glen Mills says it will appeal the state's decision, which stemmed from an investigation by the Philadelphia Inquirer. And we're going to switch gears here and move on to some political news. Attorney General William Barr is testifying before Congress. It's his first appearance before lawmakers since releasing his summary of the long-awaited special counsel Robert Mueller report.
At the end of the Obama administration, violent crime in America started to tick up. That means more robberies, more murders, and more assaults. I'm encouraged to see that the FBI's preliminary crime statistics that were released in late February show this alarming trend is being reversed. Can you tell me, what is the department doing that is working, and does your new budget add resources for fighting violent crime?
Thank you, sir. The violent crime, as I said in my statement, is one of our priorities, and making sure we don't see a resurgence of violent crime. Our base amount in the budget is $4.3 billion, and we're seeking a $138 million enhancement to that. 120 would go toward reducing violent crime in communities, and 18 would be to step up our efforts against these transnational criminal organizations. One of the flagships of our fight against violent crime is our Project Safe Neighborhoods. This is really a concept that's been around for a while under various guises, but fundamentally what it is a strategy to focus on high crime areas that brings together the local community, the law enforcement, including federal and state, and also the various social programs and social agencies that run and fund programs that are meant to prevent crimes from occurring. And they've had a tremendous record. There have been studies showing how it has suppressed crime where it's been deployed. We are seeking $100 million to increase, go from $20 million to $100 million to extend the Project Safe Neighborhoods program. We also are seeking $10.7 million to expand ATF's NIBIN program, which has proved to be a tremendous tool in the fight against violent crime. This helps us identify firearms when they're used in crime and trace it back to particular individuals. So those are some of the main initiatives we have underway to grapple with violent crime, and so far it looks as if they're successful.
I definitely agree. Our local police chiefs and sheriffs really support the Project Safe Neighborhoods, and it's a great program with a high return on investment for helping reduce gun and violent crime in our communities. Also important to the state of Mississippi is the addressing human trafficking. I know the state legislature has been working really hard on it. I know my colleague, Ms. Roby, has asked you some questions. And I want to just talk a little bit about, I know the DOJ undertook a U.S.-Mexico bilateral human trafficking enforcement initiative to combat transborder trafficking. Can you speak on this initiative, specifically how effective has it been in stopping trafficking across the border?
Yeah. I'm going to have to get back to you on that, Congressman. I really would have to talk to people to see whether it's having an impact at this point.
Okay. With my limited time, I'll jump over to address some of the issues with the crisis that we have at our southern border. I know we have a immigration case backlog. There are over 820,000 immigration cases pending nationwide. With the past 12 consecutive years seeing an increase in the number of cases. This year's budget request includes an additional $72 million to hire 100 new immigration judges. In your testimony, you mentioned that additional reforms are necessary to manage the backlog of cases. What reforms does the Department of Justice need to manage the case backlog, and what can Congress do to help you better manage the backlog?
Right. On Inauguration Day, there were 306 immigration judges. Today, we have 424. One of the problems we had was the long lead time of hiring these judges, which we've now cut from 2 years to 6 months. So it only takes 6 months to onboard a judge. Currently, there are 534 slots authorized, and we're asking for 100 more slots. So we'll be going up to 634 if that's approved. The backlog, however, We're not making progress right now against the backlog. Our productivity is increasing so that, for example, in the first quarter of this year, 19,000 cases were completed. However, during that same time, 26,000 new cases emerged. So we actually lost ground in the first quarter. As we bring on more judges, we're hoping that we're actually going to start working down that backlog. But until we can get some control of the inflow, we're not going to be able to work down that backlog. And the inflow is a function of a number of factors. The problems with the asylum laws and applying the asylum laws is one of the chief factors, the fact that they can be gamed, and when people are then released, the catch and release situation, so when people are released into the country and never show up again, that prospect is what's drawing people up from Central America, and also the fact that so many children are now included in that population. So we need to have reform, as the President has said repeatedly, we need to have reform of the immigration laws, and we need to do all we can to discourage people from making the journey up to the United States by mechanisms such as a border barrier system.
Ms. Maggie.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you, Assistant Attorney General Loftus, for being here today and for your service to our country. I don't have a question about the substance or redactions of the report, but I do want to know, was the President or anyone at the White House alerted in advance of your letter's release?
The March 24th letter, I don't believe so, but as I said, once the report is out, I'll be testifying, and I'll be glad to discuss all aspects of the process and also explain the decisions I've made.
Did you or anyone on your team consult with anyone in the White House in the crafting of that letter?
Are you talking about the March 24th letter?
Yes.
The answer to that is no, but as I say, I'm not going to discuss this further until after the report is out.
Okay, so they did not have to approve for you to release the letter, the White House. Thank you. I do want to ask my second question, and if you could answer yes or no, just in the interest of time, running out of time. Does the DOJ, under the Trump administration, consider enforcement of the Voting Rights Act a priority? Chief Roberts himself has stated that voting discrimination still exists. No one doubts that.
Yes, we do. We consider voting rights a priority.
Has the DOJ, the Civil Rights Division, brought any cases under the Trump administration to enforce Section 2 of the VRA?
No. I would point out that during the first 4 years of the Obama administration, one case was brought. So,
well, according to your website, the Department of Justice, under Obama, both President Bush's and President Clinton had brought at least over 30 cases in enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Secretary Ross credits the Department of Justice's need to enforce Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act for the reason why a citizenship question is needed on the census. The DOJ has been enforcing the Voting Rights Act for over 50 years without the need for a citizenship question. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that it's being litigated right now, and I think oral arguments on April 23rd, so I'm not going to discuss it.
Okay. I wanted to also ask about zero-tolerance policy. Do you agree with your predecessor's zero-tolerance policy memorandum issued last year, April 2018?
Well, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the zero-tolerance policy. The zero-tolerance policy is that the department would prosecute cases that are referred to the department. And the thing that caused family separation was the referral of cases to the department that involved families with children. The administration, the president, has put out an executive order, I believe, saying that that DHS is not going to follow that policy. And as far as I know, we are not getting referrals of that type. But the general proposition that the department will prosecute cases that are referred to it stands.
Well, according to an article in the New York Times yesterday, President Trump has been pushing to restart this practice of separating parents from their children. The term binary choice policy has certainly been getting traction. Is that something that you support?
I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard that?
No.
Okay. We can submit articles to your office. Are you aware of research showing that separation from initial stages to ongoing and long-term is devastating and detrimental to children's health and development?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Are you aware of any research that shows separation of families and children are detrimental to their health?
I mean, I haven't reviewed that research, but as I said, the president has already put out an order stopping the separation of families.
So would you enforce and put forth policies of new discussions that have been happening about President Trump wanting to restart this separation practice?
All I can say, I personally, sitting here, am not familiar with those discussions.
Would you support continuation of separation of families?
I support the president's policy, which is we're not going to separate families.
So you support that we will not separate families
Yes.
anymore? Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General, thanks for being with us. And, I'll just remind the committee, we've heard a lot about the Mueller report today. 22 months of investigation, 2,800 subpoenas, $25 million from taxpayers, 500 witness interviews, 19 lawyers, 40 FBI agents, and who knows how many warrants. And the conclusions were simple. No collusion, no obstruction. I remember when the first letter was released, and there were a lot of complaints then, Attorney General, that you weren't releasing the summary soon enough. And then here today, I hear it was too hasty, too quick. So now you've had time to review, your team's had time to review. You've indicated maybe within the next week we'll get the report released. So for the committee, is there anything new you've seen since the review of the entirety of the report that would change your conclusions?
No, Congressman. As I explained, my March 24th letter was meant to state the bottom line conclusions of the report, not summarize the report. And I tried to use as much of the special counsel's own language as I could. But they were just stating the bottom line conclusions, and there's nothing to suggest to me that those, that those weren't.
No collusion, no obstruction. It's over. It's done. It's over.
Well, the letter speaks for itself.
I thought it did too. Well, I'll shift in a second because members of Congress have said they intend to ignore the public redactions and leak the full report. Would that give you pause if that were to occur?
Someone's going to leak the full report?
That's what we, that's what members of Congress have been saying.
Well, that would be unfortunate because, there's grand jury information in there that under the law has to be redacted.
We've heard members of this committee today say that the American people deserve to see the full report. And so even members of this committee have indicated that. The chairman of Judiciary just this weekend said that, this is Chairman Nadler, certainly some of it would not leak publicly, that he has discretion. And the committee has a very good record of protecting information which it decides to protect. So, General Barr, under federal law, does a member of Congress have the power to arbitrarily decide what portions of the special counsel's report they might release, redacted or not?
Well, not if it violates the law, and we believe 6E does apply to members of Congress. So,
it's interesting because this whole mechanism for the special counsel, as I said, was established during the Clinton administration in the wake of Ken Starr's report. And that's why the current rule says that the report should be kept confidential, because there was a lot of reaction against the publication of Ken Starr's report. And many of the people who are right now calling for release of this report were basically castigating Ken Starr and others for releasing the Starr report. I have already said that I think the situation here requires me to exercise my discretion to get as much information out as I can, and I think these categories, I think most fair-minded people would agree, are things that have to be redacted.
Right. And I guess just thinking about the chairman of Judiciary, if he were to release, or any member of Congress were to release the full report or redacted portions of the report, are they in compliance with law or in violation of the law? And
I don't want to speculate about all the circumstances that would be involved. I don't intend at this stage to send the full unredacted report to the committee, so I'm not sure where he would get it.
Okay, and then just
if he got it directly from the council, that would be unfortunate. I doubt that would happen.
A quick question about subpoena. I'm not on the Judiciary Committee. My understanding is, though, they've issued a subpoena to you to release the full report. Would that put you in violation of federal law? If you were to comply?
In the current situation, I don't think I have the latitude to release 6E material. As to the other categories, as I said, I'm willing to discuss those with the Judiciary Committees. I want to try to accommodate and satisfy their interests, but at the same time uphold the law. And right now, and there's been a recent case decided in the District of Columbia just, I think, within the last week on this, the 6E material is not releasable.
Well, thank you for the fashion in which you've handled this. I think you've been upright. You've been an example of integrity, and I know that you are going to abide by the law. And my hope is that all members of Congress would follow like kind. So, thank you, Attorney General, for your good work.
Mr. Christ.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General Barr, for being with us today. On the question of obstruction of justice, you stated in your March 24th letter that the Mueller report does not exonerate the president. Can you elaborate on what is meant by does not exonerate the president?
I think that's the language from the report.
Right, I understand that.
That's a statement made by the special counsel.
Right.
I reported as one of his bottom line conclusions, so I'm not in a position to discuss that further until the report is all out. And then what is meant by exonerate is really a question that I can't answer, what he meant by that.
But as you sit here today, you can't opine, after having read the report yourself, why it reaches that conclusion that it does not exonerate the president.
That's right.
Reports have emerged recently, General, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter, that it does not adequately or accurately necessarily portray the report's findings. Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't. I suspect that they probably wanted, more put out. But in my view, I was not interested in putting out summaries or trying to summarize, because I think any summary, regardless of who prepares it, not only runs the risk of, being under-inclusive or over-inclusive, but also, would trigger a lot of discussion and analysis that really should await everything coming out at once. So I was not interested in a summary of the report. And in fact, at the time I put out my March 24th letter, there was nothing from the special counsel that wasn't marked as potentially containing 6E material, and I had no material that had been sanitized of 6E material. So I felt that I should state the bottom line conclusions, and I tried to use Special Counsel Mueller's own language in doing that.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I'm curious, did you feel that there was an obligation upon you or your office to prepare this four-letter overview, if you will, rather than summary, rather than having the special counsel's team do it themselves? Why did that happen, I guess, is what I'm trying to find out.
It happened because the special counsel was providing the report to the Attorney General, and I was making the decision as to whether to make it public or any part of it public. And in my judgment, it was important for people to know the bottom line conclusions of the report while we worked on the necessary redactions to make the whole thing available.
Let me ask that.
Unfortunately, that's a matter of weeks, and I don't think that the public would have tolerated, and Congress would not have tolerated, at least knowing the bottom line. And, as you know from your own experience, from a prosecutor's standpoint, the bottom line is binary, which is charges or no charges.
Indeed. Did you contemplate having the special counsel's office help you with the preparation of your March 24th letter, or did you?
We offered to have Bob review it before putting it out, and he declined.
I didn't ask you about reviewing. I asked if you thought about having them help prepare the March 24th letter. I mean, they did the report after all.
No, I didn't think about it.
Why not?
Because it was my letter.
You said that the special counsel and his team were not shown or did not review the March 24th letter, right? You offered to let him review it?
Yes.
Did you offer to anyone else to let other people review it besides the special counsel?
Not that I recall. You mean outside the department?
Anywhere?
No.
Yes, outside the department. Let's start there.
Well, the answer I'm pretty sure is no, but
you're not sure?
I am sure.
Okay. I think I'll yield. I only have 15 seconds. Thank you, General.
Ace. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I'd love to talk to you about your 2020 budget, but what is far more critical at present and has much far more reaching consequences to the credibility of our government is the prompt and full disclosure of the Mueller report. The current non-disclosure of that report has only worsened a pervasive distrust of government generally and of Mr. Mueller's investigation and your department's response to it specifically. This really started very early on in the investigation with excessive secrecy about exactly what we were taking a look at. Here is the supplemental memo from the Deputy Acting Attorney General, and this is what drives the public crazy when they see something like this. This is what we have to try to avoid when we get into this. In your March 24th 3.5-page summary of the report, you stated that you are, quote, mindful of the public interest in this matter and that you intend to release, quote, as much of the report as you can consistent with applicable law, regulations, and department policies. You know, of course, that on March 14th, the House resolved unanimously, 420-0, all members of this committee and House voting, that the full report be released publicly, except where prohibited by law, and be released to Congress unconditionally. Do you appreciate the importance of a full disclosure of this report, both personally and on behalf of your department?
I appreciate the importance of releasing as much of the information in the report as I can consistent with the law.
Okay, well, let's get into that then. What specific laws, regulations, and department policies, as you've cited in your letter, do you claim require or justify you to withhold portions of the report? You've already talked about 6E. Okay, what else?
Well, as I said, there are 4 categories of information that are being redacted.
I understand that, sir.
Okay,
and one of those
you
categories.
asked what else. The other one is we've asked the intelligence community to identify any information that could reveal intelligence sources and methods.
Okay, but what authority do you have to state that you have discretion to withhold? I get the grand jury side. That's 6E. And by the way, you know as well as I do that 6E also encompasses an intelligence committee exception. So I assume you're going to say that that falls under that category, that there can be some release or withholding of intelligence-specific information under your 6E category. What about the other two categories? What justifies you in claiming the discretion to withhold that information?
Well, are you talking about the intelligence?
No, I'm talking about the other two categories. I'm talking about ongoing prosecutions, but I'm particularly focused on privacy and reputational interest because it seems to me that that's an exception that you can just drive a truck through. So, I mean, you're the one that says you have the discretion to do that, and I'm asking you, where does your discretion lie? Where is your
regulation?
Authority?
Because the regulation that sets up the special counsel and also provides for his report to the Attorney General and also what the Attorney General can release specifies that it has to be consistent with the department's longstanding policies. And the department's longstanding policy and practice is that if we're not going to charge someone, we don't go out and discuss the bad or derogatory information about them. That's what got everyone outraged at what FBI Director Comey did in the case of Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so the regulation back to longstanding policy is what justifies that exception, right? In your view?
The regulation that says that any release has to be consistent with that.
Okay, good. Let's go to 6E here for a second. Well, before I get to 6E, are you maintaining or will you maintain any right to withhold any of the information in that report based on a so-called claim of executive privilege?
Am I what?
Are you going to claim that you have a right to withhold any of that report based on a so-called claim of executive privilege?
Well, any claim of executive privilege would have to be asserted by the president.
And the president,
as I said in my letter, which sort of speaks for itself, he has said that he's leaving the decisions up to me.
Okay. Are you going to claim executive privilege to keep any of that report back?
As I said, there's no plan. I have no plan to do that.
Okay. Do you believe that executive privilege applies to any broader range of communications than specific direct communications from the president?
You know, I would have to review the latest opinions from OLC about the precise scope of it, but it's not relevant to me right now.
And as far as you know, does it apply to any communications by the president before he was president?
As I say, I'm not sure what the learning is in the Department of Justice on that.
Okay. You're aware that that there are exceptions under 6E under which you can, in fact, disclose grand jury material. Some of those are within your discretion, but many of those are subject to a ruling of a court, correct?
What are they?
Well, there's 6E, there's 5 exceptions in 6E that allow you to go to court to ask the court for permission to release those. It's up to the court to decide whether to release. Are you intending to go to court to ask for guidance and or direction and or an order where you are uncertain whether you can in fact release or should in fact release materials?
Oh, but I mean, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is free to go to court if he feels one of those exceptions is applicable.
The right is yours to ask for these exceptions.
Why do you say the right is mine?
Because you are the exercising authority under 6E.
Yeah, but I think if the chairman believes that he's entitled to receive it, he can move the court for it.
Well, I'll come back to this. It's your right to ask. So I'm asking, what is your intention?
My intention is not to ask for it at this stage. I mean, if the chairman has a good explanation of why 6E does not apply and his need for the information, I'm willing to listen to that. As I say, my first agenda item here is to get the public report out.
what can be gotten out publicly. That's going to be within a week. So
my time's up. I'll come back.
I'll discuss these issues in greater detail after that occurs.
Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Attorney General, according to recent reporting, the Trump administration is pursuing far fewer civil rights cases, including hate crimes, police bias, and disability right cases than the Obama or Bush administrations. The DOJ's Civil Rights Department has started 60% fewer cases against potential violations during the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Then during the President Obama administration, and 50% fewer than under the George Bush administration. Can you please provide me why that is happening, and what are you planning to do to address that?
I'd have to see those figures and how they're broken down. I haven't seen those figures before. The areas that I'm familiar with, such as hate crimes, it's simply not true. We have an enviable record of prosecuting hate crimes at the same or higher rate than previous administrations, as far as I'm aware. I'd have to see what else you're talking about.
Are you familiar with the data of what the percentage have they increased under the Trump administration?
I think
there are indications they have.
Have they increased?
Yes.
Whether hate crimes versus the prosecution of hate crimes?
Hate crimes, have they increased under this administration?
I haven't seen any data, going from 2017.
So is it a priority? You haven't looked at the data, you're not aware of it?
As I said in my confirmation hearings, I'm very concerned about hate crimes and intend to vigorously pursue them. The data that I have seen have showed an increase going back to 2013. So I agree with you that they have been increasing, but I have seen no data to say that it's different under the Trump administration.
Attorney General, I want you to, we use the word stay woke sometime in community activism where you are in tune with what's happening on the ground. I appreciate your tenure or your length of time that you've been Attorney General, but I can tell you that this is something that's very important, and I expect for you to be informed and aware of what's happening in this area. I wanted to follow up on a question that my colleague Cartwright asked, because I really need to ask this question. I watched with in deliberate intent of your answers when who do you report to? The President of the United States or to the people of America? You, during your confirmation, without duress, said you report to the people, but you just said when it came to the ACA ruling that you gave, that the President was very clear that he opposed it, and so let it work out in legislation. I want you to be very, let me finish my question because that's what I heard. Maybe you need to clarify it. I want you to explain to me, do you understand your role when you issue a statement abolishing Affordable Care Act, that you, as the Attorney General of the people of the United States, have a responsibility to understand and support that decision, not based on the policy of a President of the United States? It was clearly laid out the impact it would have, and I want you to respond to that because that's what I heard, sir.
Well, if you did listen to my confirmation.
I did, sir.
Okay, I distinguish between three different roles the Attorney General plays. One is in enforcement, another is in a policy role, and the third is in providing legal advice. And what I said then is that the Attorney General has the responsibility to provide straight-from-the-shoulder legal advice as to what the Attorney General thinks is the right view of the law.
So in this case of ACA, you felt it was the right decision under the law to issue that you support abolishing the Affordable Care Act. That's your legal opinion.
No, you didn't let me finish, which is that the first obligation is to provide your best view of the law. If the president or your executive branch agencies that you're representing and are stakeholders in the issue disagree with that advice and want to pursue a different position, then the Attorney General litigating on behalf of the United States should take that position if it's reasonable and a defensible legal position, even if it's not the position that the Attorney General would take if the Attorney General was a judge. That's the position I stated at my confirmation hearing.
So
also,
we can be clear, sir, what you're saying is that if you disagree with the president, if your legal experience and your expertise doesn't agree and your president says something different, you're obligated to agree and enforce what the president says. Is that what you're telling me as the Attorney General of the United States of America?
Well,
is that your statement, sir?
Well, it's the same as when we represent and are defending a law of Congress. Sometimes we don't think the law as an original matter actually.
Sir, we pass laws. The President of the United States do not pass laws.
Right, but I'm saying that. But I feel that if there's a reasonable and defensible argument that could be made to defend a statute, we frequently do that.
Sir, I'm very concerned at this point. I am over my time, and I will come back at my second one, but I am very concerned with your statement. Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General, in your testimony, you said violent crime has declined since 2016. But as we learn from the FBI, homegrown violent extremism has grown over the same time. What priority and resources have you included in the 2020 budget to counter such violent extremism?
I don't think we break out. Maybe you can help me, Lee. I don't think we break out the budget targeting that particular category of offense.
We do not have a separate category for violent extremism, but we do pursue all matters of violent crime together. And we have the $138 million and 135 new positions for our violent crime efforts. In the FBI, we're adding 47 new FBI agents to the FBI for a variety of new initiatives. And among them is the FBI's work on violent extremism.
Okay, it's important for this committee to know at a certain point how many folks will be assigned to this or how many dollars will be assigned to it, because it is an issue that concerns all Americans, I believe, and we need to deal with it in a proper way.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but you know, the people who are on the watch for this kind of thing, whether they be FBI agents or U.S. attorneys pursuing potential cases, are the very same people that would also be looking at other forms of terrorism potentially. So it's hard to allocate exactly the dollars by that category. But, you know, obviously it is a serious issue, and it's one that the FBI devotes a lot of effort to.
Well, as long as we know that the department, the agency is looking at it, is dealing with it, is taking it seriously, we can then work together on it. That's the easier part.
Mr. Chairman, if I can add a bit more. We do have in the FBI's budget this year, we have the $16 million for the FBI's participation in the National Vetting Center with other federal entities, and that helps the FBI look closely at individuals who may be coming to the United States. So we have that vetting money in the FBI. We also have $4 million in the Office of Justice Programs on grants that go towards looking at extremism and domestic terrorism.
Good. A few weeks ago, the ATF Director Brandon told us that the department's fiscal year 2020 budget request would result in ATF being forced to let go more than 300 staff due to increasing investigatory costs. As we seek to address rising gun violence in this nation, how can the department justify a proposal that will result in fewer resources dedicated to that goal?
Well, let me just say first that I'm a huge fan of ATF. I think they're an outstanding agency, and I would love, any money spent on the ATF is well worth it. One of the common themes I hear from U.S. attorneys is how valuable the ATF agents are, and their technology is just outstanding in helping to deal with gun violence and violent crime. Now, I am told that the statement made by Mr. Brandon was actually based on faulty information, and we don't think that it would lead to we are asking for more money for ATF, and we don't think it would result in fewer agents, but maybe Lee could help me with that.
Sure. So I think very highly of the ATF chief. I've known him for years. We've worked together very, very closely. We took a hard look at his budget. This year's budget will increase ATF by 3.9%, actually just about 4%. It does have increases for ATF. If you look back over the last 3 years, we've given an 8.7% increase to ATF. So we do think ATF is important. We are trying to support ATF. I know the ATF chief is very concerned about his agency. His budget is susceptible to absorbing inflationary increases, and if the pay raise isn't funded or if his rents or contracts go up. He's very concerned about that, and he's worried that it'll translate into a loss of staff. I can tell you that we have looked at this year's budget, though, and at the 4% increase we're asking for, we don't think that translates into loss of hundreds of staff. And our commitment is that we want to work closely with ATF, make sure they have what they need. As the Attorney General says, any resources ATF receives, I think, will be put to very good use. But we're committed to working closely with the ATF folks to make sure they make it through the year. And again, a 4% increase on this budget we think is a strong request for ATF, strong request for their NIBIN system, the $11 million for that. There's $4 million for their Spartan case management system. So we are trying to stand behind ATF in this budget.
Well, I would hope that you can get this issue resolved in terms of letting us know what really is going on, because as we put together the bill, and that will happen pretty soon, I need to be able to go to this young woman on my right and tell her I need more money for certain agencies. And we can't do this if they're saying they're going to lose over 300 folks, and you'll say they're not, or that it's not. We need that picture cleared up.
Absolutely, and we'll help you.
Thank you. Ms. Satterholt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, of course, the Department of Justice has submitted almost $30 billion of taxpayer dollars to use. And I want to remind my colleagues that is what the purpose of the Attorney General being here today is, to talk about that $30 billion that's of taxpayer dollars going to be used. And unfortunately, I see so many of the questions here this morning have gone toward a grassy knoll conspiracy theory regarding with the Mueller report. So I hope we can focus on the questions of having the Attorney General given of his time this morning to be here to answer these questions regarding the budget. As you know, General Barr, the DNA forensic science can speed the prosecution of the guilty, protect the innocent from wrongful prosecution, and exonerate the wrongfully convicted. Mr. Loftus, as in prior years, the DOJ is proposing to use the fund available under the Debbie Smith program for DNA analysis and capacity enhancement, along with, quote, other local, state, and federal forensic activities. So long as sexual assault kit backlogs persist, I believe it's important that this funding be focused on DNA analysis and capacity enhancement. What are some of the, quote, other local, state, and federal forensic activities that are funded under this authority?
The National Institute of Justice, which is inside OJP, funds a program that strengthens the medical examiner and coroner systems within our country in a variety of ways, supporting forensics pathologists. And there's an alarming shortage of pathologists across the country. Opioid crisis has created a additional strain due to overdose deaths. So one of the focuses of our grant money today is on medical examiners and coroners. We also provide grants directly to forensic laboratories to encourage their research And the focus of the grant is to make sure that they have all the tools they need to have effective forensic testing, and that has a real impact on the DNA backlogs across the country. If we can help them with their technology, we can really reduce the backlog. So that's one of our key things we are focused on. We have $105 million in this budget for DNA-related programs, and we have $47.5 million to work on the backlog of the National Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, and we want to make sure that that money is funded in the budget because it's very important to help the states and localities with the sexual assault examinations and the kits and make sure that is taken care of. So we believe we have a good, solid budget in this area to continue to work on both the DNA and the sexual assault kit areas.
Let me switch over just a minute to opioids. Of course, that epidemic continues to ravage communities in my home state of Alabama, and I know you realize that fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin, and overdose deaths are on the rise with fentanyl. The president has called this a national health crisis. It's impacting families and the future of this country. What would you say are some of the most significant actions that the Department of Justice has taken to curb the deadly opioid epidemic that's plaguing the country currently?
The whole, just fentanyl or the whole opioid?
Well, both, or either one that you want to address.
Fentanyl, there's recently been a development. As you know, most of the fentanyl and fentanyl analogs come from China. And the Chinese have agreed to schedule all fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, which would make enforcement much easier in China. And we would like to see a comparable action here taken in the United States to allow us to schedule fentanyl, keep fentanyl on the schedule, and all analogs of fentanyl. That's a very important step. Now, whether the Chinese action, they actually deliver on it from an enforcement standpoint remains to be seen, but it's something we've been asking them to do, and we're very pleased that they've done it. But generally speaking, in the opioid arena, as you know, one of the main problems and essentially the sort of the groundwork for this epidemic was set by the abuse of prescription drugs and the diversion of illicit drugs. And a lot of our efforts are devoted toward going after healthcare providers and companies and others that contributed to this by overprescription or permitting diversion. And so there's a lot of civil and criminal action around the country that is going after these bad actors and their task forces around the country focused on that aspect of it. And so the first effort is to contract the pool of people who are addicted by licit drugs. On the illicit drug front, we basically have a two-pronged strategy of going after the TOCs, the transnational criminal organizations in Mexico, primarily in Mexico, that are responsible for most of these drugs coming into the United States, and also the local distribution networks. And we have the FBI, the DEA, and a substantial portion of our U.S. Attorney's Office is focused on dealing with these local distribution networks. And so that's basically the strategy.
Okay. Thank you. Are you back?
See, Mr. Chairman? I think it was Congressman Chris was asking me about the letters and whether anyone was involved in the letters other than people at Justice. And I checked with my staff and was told that just before the letters were out, after they were finalized and just before they went out, we did advise the White House counsel's office that the letters were being sent, but they were not allowed or even asked to make any changes to the letters. But we notified them before we issued them.
Mr. Chris, I'm sure would have asked you, did they get to see the letter, however?
I think it may have been read to them. They did not get to see the letter.
Thank you. Ms. Lowy.
Mr. Attorney General, I want to get to some other items in the budget today because under current law, background checks must be done within 3 days or the transaction is allowed to proceed regardless of whether a person is lawfully permitted to buy a gun. In my judgment, it is vitally important that background checks are done thoroughly, as we know the results of incomplete information can be fatal. For example, we know that the shooter who perpetrated the Charleston shooting had passed a background check despite information that should have disqualified him. The House passed Enhanced Background Checks Act substantially increases the amount of time allowed for a NICS background check to ensure that we close these loopholes. I'm concerned that until this bill moves through the Senate and onto the President's desk, that 3 days is not often enough time to evaluate a background check with questionable information. In your judgment, would fewer prohibited individuals be able to purchase firearms if this time period was extended?
The data that I have heard is that there are about 6,000 of these delayed responses where these default sales occur after the expiration of the 3 days. And that when you go back and look at those 6,000, approximately 2,000 of those, about a third, are people that would have flunked the background check, and their ATF goes out and gets the weapon, retrieves the weapon. I think it's fairly rare that, well, I think that the Aurora shooter may have been someone who got that default sale. That it was sold to them after the 3-day period. So it does occasionally happen.
Wait a minute. Occasionally? Didn't you mention 2,000, 6,000?
Well, they're not all shooters. In other words, it does sometimes happen that somebody
Do you support extending the time period? I've had an interaction with so many people in law enforcement, and in many cases, 3 days is just not enough. Do you support extending the time period?
No. I think that, that puts a burden on a lot of people.
Who may be buying a gun that shouldn't have a gun. Is that what you're saying? When you're saying it puts a burden on a lot of people,
I think
I'd rather put a burden on those who are doing the investigation than the
I would put the
shooters.
emphasis on getting accurate records put into the system and make sure that we're getting all the records into the system. I think a far bigger problem is the problem of mental health. That is another elephant in the room. That's where all these school shootings are arising from. And we have to figure out a way of upgrading the NICS system so it actually helps us to detect people with mental illness that should not have guns. And I think we should be investing in NICS, the accuracy of the records, the obligations of states to put those records into the system. And make that a stronger system, one that we can rely on. That's where I would put the effort.
I'm not sure what you mean by a stronger system. In other words, if one of your colleagues was doing a study and looking at a background check and said, I need 3 more days, do you feel that person should have 3 more days, 2 more days, 6 more days? Isn't it more important to get a good, thorough background check than limiting the office to 3 days?
What I was saying is that the better job we do of getting the records into the system, we won't have those 3 day, that level of a 3-day default sale. I mean, you mentioned sometimes federal agencies are not putting the appropriate records in, as we saw with the Air Force situation. Sometimes state agencies are not putting the records in. So there are gaps in the records.
Let me go on to the next question.
That's a far more important thing to address.
Let me go on to the next question. I do hope we can continue this conversation another time. You have referred to the Violence Against Women Act as a bad idea and not in the legitimate interest of the federal government. These are investments that fund services for victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault that many of my constituents, including those trapped in cycles of domestic violence and looking for a way out, rely on. Under Republican leadership in the previous Congress, maybe I'll just wait a minute, the authorization of the Violence Against Women Act was allowed to expire despite bipartisan support. Thankfully, last week, the reauthorization passed the House, again with bipartisan support. During your confirmation hearing, you changed your position and supported VAWA's programs, pledging to familiarize yourself with the office, its work, and its program. I was delighted to hear that. So I'd be interested in knowing whether you support the reauthorization of VAWA, and do you support the House-passed reauthorization bill?
I do support the reauthorization of Violence Against Women Act. I'm not sure about the House bill and what's in it, but I do support the reauthorization of that provision. Let me say that to the extent I said something against Violence Against Women statute, I believe that that was in the context of it when it originally came up, 2.5 decades ago or 30 years ago, somewhere in that range. And what I said was that in that point it was a substantive law relating to the penalty, federalizing certain acts of violence against women, and that was eventually struck down as not having a sufficient Commerce Clause basis. I think that's what my concern with the Violence Against Women's Act was many, many years ago. It was a different kind of act. I fully support what we're doing right now on violence against women.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted that you support the current actions, and I'm glad to know that there was good bipartisan support for the bill. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Roby.
Attorney General Barr, I mentioned earlier in my questions about sex and human trafficking, about the coordination between state and local law enforcement and how important that is in combating a number of different areas of crime. And I wanted you to address, if you would, the overall reduction of state and local law enforcement activities grant programs by the amount of $583 million.
Right. Well, I think part of that, a big chunk of that, is the reduction in the COPS grant program, which was in the 300 millions, and we're putting it down to 99 million. But the 99 million does cover the hiring part of the COPS grant program. So that translates into continued hiring of state and local law enforcement officers. The rationale for not funding the rest of COPS is that that is really, we feel, addressed in the funding that goes to the federal opioid task forces and other task forces that the states can participate on and get in and get paid by the federal government, but they are part of a federal-state cooperative task force. So it's really reorienting the spending toward those joint task forces versus funding purely state task forces. Lee, I don't know if you have something to add on it about the other grant money.
Right, on the other grant money, the apparent reductions in the 2020 requests. One reason the grant dollars look smaller is that the Office of Violence Against Women is proposed to be moved into a mandatory funding account where we think it can ensure that there's available money for violence against women programs, the $493 million we have for violence against women programs. There's also a adjustment to the crime victims money. The obligation limit there goes down by about $1 billion, but over the last 2 years, that's an area that's received $8 billion, and it's received $10 billion over the last 3 years. So overall, we still have over $4.3 billion in grant programs proposed in this budget. The Attorney General talked about the impact on cops, but $4.3 billion is what we're looking for your help on in supporting this year's budget.
Okay, thank you. The area that I represent is home to a large number of retirees. I'm increasingly concerned about the elderly being taken advantage of by scammers and con men, especially given the rise of technology and social media. So I'm sure you're aware of this problem, but the question is, what are you doing about it? And again, as always, what deficiencies may exist that you need more resources to help?
Right. In the area of fraud, it's such a vast area of law enforcement that I have always felt it's important to focus on the sleeping giants. And when I was Attorney General last time, it was healthcare fraud, and that was, in fact, the sleeping giant. This time, I'm trying to focus on elder fraud, which is suddenly awoken into a major area of criminality. It arises because of a concatenation of events, including the baby boomers, the larger elder population, and the internet, new technologies, and some of the increased loneliness that many elder people unfortunately experience later in life. And this has mushroomed, as I think anyone whose phone rings over the weekend with these scammers knows. More and more of these scams are coming along. We have a major effort in this area. We have we have one person in the department, in the deputy's office, focused on elder care enforcement and the task forces that are being set up to deal with that. In March, we had a big national sweep where we indicted 200 defendants involved in these various scams. A lot of these scams are perpetrated wholly within the United States, but increasingly they are actually operated by international criminal organizations. A lot of them come out of India. There are signs that organized crime, not La Cosa Nostra, but other kinds of global organized crime, are getting into these areas. They are so lucrative, and the losses are substantial, and people, this is a population that doesn't have a runway to recover when they lose their life savings. So we are ratcheting up the effort. We've had 2 annual sweeps with tremendous results, but I have set up a strike force to go after the large organized criminal organizations that we think are behind this.
Thank you, and thank you again for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Barr, I'd like to finish up our discussion of the health care law. Our Republican colleagues in the Senate, and in particular Senator McConnell, have made it clear that they have no intention of introducing, let alone passing, a new health care law, a new health care plan for at least the next 2 years. And apparently that view has been prevailed upon the White House, and the President has accepted it. My question is, we've already discussed the devastating effects if this lawsuit wins and repeals the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Given the position of the Senate Republicans and the President himself opposing any progress on health care for the next 2 years, if the Supreme Court of the United States were to grant credence to your position and sweep away the health care law, either in part or in entirety, would the Department of Justice support a stay of the effect of that ruling until Congress, the President, this nation can formulate a plan properly to supplant the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act?
Well, you're asking me to speculate whether or not we're going to, the administration's position is going to prevail in court. And beyond that, whether if it does prevail in court, when that is, and also whether or not there'll be a legislative response if, in fact, we prevail.
That's absolutely true. I'm asking you to speculate on those, and if questions are proper in this room, Attorney General. If you win the case, will you agree that we ought to stay the effect of that until a new plan can go in place, rather than strand all the people with pre-existing conditions and all the people that whose health care will lapse because of that ruling?
Well, from my experience, the Supreme Court would likely deal with that in their opinion and provide some kind of period to wind it down.
You want them to do it sua sponte, on their own motion, with no prompting from the Justice Department. Is that it?
I didn't say that. I'd say, whatever the administration's position is at that point, we'll carry out from a legal standpoint.
Well, I'm dismayed to hear that you're willing to drive our healthcare system off the cliff with no plan for replacing
Well,
it.
I think your premise that the Justice Department makes health care policy is simply wrong. We take legal positions in cases.
Well, I'm going to follow that up. Numerous reports have indicated that you, the chief lawyer for the federal government, and Secretary Azar, who is the lead on health care policy for our federal government, strongly argued against supporting the complete repeal of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. However, reports indicate you and Secretary Azar were overruled by Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and the President himself. Now, at any point, did you convey either to Mr. Mulvaney or the President any concerns about either the effects of this lawsuit prevailing, if it does, or concerns about the dubious legal arguments in this lawsuit? And did Secretary Azar communicate concerns about the effects on our American healthcare system?
Well, I'm not going to get into, the internal deliberations of the administration on this point. I had ample opportunity to present my views. And I believe that the final decision reached is a legally defensible and reasonable legal position. It is a position that prevailed in the district court, and it is a position taken by the 4 dissenting justices in the NFIB case, which is that once you do away with the mandate, the rest of the statute cannot stand.
Are you citing executive privilege by declining to tell me about the discussions between you, Mr. Azar, Mr. Mulvaney?
Call it what you wish. I'm not discussing it.
You're refusing to discuss it. All right. Well, it's a decision that makes more extreme and, in fact, even contradicts. The decision to go forward with this position contradicts the DOJ's June 2018 position on the case, which was so controversial then that 3 of the 4 career attorneys representing the government refused to sign on to the briefs and actually remove themselves from the case. The American people deserve to understand if you and Secretary Azar support this lawsuit based on sound rationale or if it was just bald politics talking. I'm requesting that you submit this assertion of executive privilege in writing to this committee if that is what you're doing. Don't ask us to call it what it is. I'm asking you, if you're exercising executive privilege, we need to know it, and we need to know it in writing. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Palazzo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Attorney General Barr. In your testimony, you mentioned cybersecurity, and being that the FBI is the lead federal agency for investigating cyber attacks by criminals, overseas adversaries, and terrorists, the threat is incredibly serious and growing. Cyber intrusion is more commonplace, more dangerous, and more sophisticated. Targets include critical infrastructure, trade secrets, cutting-edge R&D, identity theft, and as well as online predators, and et cetera. While my colleagues on the left are chasing shiny objects, I believe the American people want us to address the real physical and financial threats that exist in the real world. Can you elaborate on the growing threat and maybe provide some scenarios that we should be concerned with, call out some of these foreign overseas adversaries, and what is the FBI doing to transform itself and protect Americans?
You're correct that the cyber threat is a serious and growing threat, obviously, and it's a threat to our intellectual capital, our trade secrets, and therefore our economic health. It's a threat to our national security. It exposes some of our fundamental infrastructure to disruption. We all have heard about the attempt to penetrate into election infrastructure, and the results of that could be devastating. The FBI is receiving in this budget $70 million to upgrade and enhance their cyber tools and capabilities to deal with these threats. A total of $72 million is in the budget. In terms of emerging threats, as you know, we have a China initiative in the department because China, we think, poses a very serious threat to the United States in terms of economic espionage. as well as classical espionage. And a lot of that does use cyber tools and threats involve cyber threats to the United States. And we're very focused on that, as well as not just the industrial espionage, but also the use of non-traditional collectors that the Chinese are able to marshal within the United States by co-opting Chinese nationals who may be working in universities or laboratories and so forth. So it's a broad gauge threat, and probably our highest priority at this point in terms of dealing with counter-espionage.
If I can add one thing, we have over $750 million overall in our budget. The Attorney General mentions the $72 million increase. The $70 million is the FBI. The smaller piece, though, is worth mentioning. It's only $2 million, but it's really going to have a lot of bang for its buck. It's money put into the Justice Security Operations Center. That allows us to protect our own networks from intrusions and malware. So it's really important that the agencies protect their own networks. So.
Well, we definitely appreciate the FBI's work on this. I mean, when our universities are, coming up with cutting-edge research and development and technologies, just to see them stolen by our adversaries, that they didn't invest any money in it, they didn't work hard to create it, and they take it from us. That's, we're wasting taxpayer dollars. When I first came to Congress, I was on the Armed Services Committee, and many of the generals and admirals said one of their, they have several threats that they're concerned with that keep them up at night. There's never just one. But one of them that was recurring was our cyber threats, knocking out our power grids, crippling us, our financial markets. And that would just create massive amounts of chaos. And so these are extremely important. This is why I think the American people are interested in having this conversation and making sure the FBI is, using their resources in the protection and security of America. And to know now that technological gap between some of us and our overseas adversaries, where it was 25, 30, 40 years, just 8 years ago, is now we're neck and neck. That's a true threat to our economy as well as our national security. So, Attorney General, thank you, and thank your team at the FBI for taking care and keeping America safe. Thank you.
Ms. Meng.
Thank you. And Attorney General, I want to thank you for clarifying the answers to my questions. And just want to confirm in relation to communication with the White House or any of its team, you are answering that for both the March 24th and the March 29th letters, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. You brought up a really important topic in my district, and I'm sure in many of my colleagues' districts, about elder fraud. Last year, I had a piece of legislation signed into law by President Trump, supported by Congressman Barton and Lance at the time, and basically targeting and allowing the United States to prosecute those calls that you mentioned that were actually coming from outside of the United States. We were very happy to have the legislation signed. However, our local law enforcement, in our case, the NYPD, is having a difficult time in terms of actually catching and figuring out who these perpetrators are. I don't know if you have any further ideas on how we can approach this, and just in general in the future, I would love to work with your office on this.
Yes, I'd like to do that, Congresswoman. That's exactly why I set up a strike force to be able. I think we need to get ourselves to a higher level of sophistication in pursuing these crimes, because although they might appear to the victim to be sort of not very sophisticated, they are in fact very sophisticated, and we have to get back to the people behind the scam. And we have to use all our tools, our treaty tools, our cooperative agreements with the enforcement authorities in other countries to get the information we need.
You can help us in our budget on this. We have $611,000 in the Civil Division's budget in the Consumer Protection Branch They do a lot of elder fraud work, and we sure could use that money in this year's budget to help the Civil Division continue its work in the elder fraud area.
Thank you. My second question.
One other thing I could say is that I've asked to put together a number of additional legislative proposals that would give us more tools in this area as well as more effective penalties. And I think that's being done, and I will be proposing them. So I'd like to provide them to you once we're done.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask about sanctuary jurisdictions. As you know, last November, Judge
And we were just listening to the Attorney General William Barr testifying before Congress in his first appearance since releasing his summary of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Barr said Tuesday he expects to release a redacted version of the Special Counsel's Trump-Russia probe report within a week. Barr told members of Congress at his first public appearance since receiving Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report that his earlier projection of releasing a version by mid-April still stood. The report, which is nearly 400 pages long, is being scoured now to remove grand jury information and details that relate to pending investigations. Here's a brief look at some of Barr's earlier testimony.
Letter of the 24th, Mr. Mueller's team did not play a role in drafting that document, although we offered him the opportunity to review it before we sent it out, and he declined that. The letter on the 29th, I don't believe that that was reviewed by Mr. Mueller or that they participated in drafting that letter. But to go back to something you said in your opening statement about the availability of the report, as I've said, as you pointed out, since my confirmation, I do think it's important that the public have an opportunity to learn the results of the special counsel's work. And I said then that I would work diligently to make as much information public as I could and available to Congress as I could. You will recognize that I'm operating under a regulation that was put together during the Clinton administration and does not provide for the publication of the report, but I am relying on my own discretion to make as much public as I can. Now, in my letter of the March 29th, I identified 4 areas that I feel should be redacted, and I think most people would agree. The first is grand jury information, 6E material. The second is information that the intelligence community believes would reveal intelligence sources and methods. The third are information in the report that could interfere with ongoing prosecutions. You will recall that the special counsel did spin off a number of cases that are still being pursued, and we want to make sure that none of the information in the report would impinge upon either the ability of the prosecutors to prosecute the cases or the fairness to the defendants. And finally, we intend to redact information that implicates the privacy or reputational interests of peripheral players where there is a decision not to charge them. Right now, the special counsel is working with us on identifying information in the reports that fall under those 4 categories. We will color code the excisions from the report, and we will provide explanatory notes describing the basis for each redaction. So, for example, if a redaction is made because of a court order in a pending prosecution, we'll state that, and we will distinguish between the various categories. This process is going along very well, and my original timetable of being able to release this by mid-April stands. And so I think that from my standpoint, within a week, I will be in a position to release the report to the public, and then I will engage with the chairman of both judiciary committees about that report and about any further requests that they have.
So let me just get one thing clear for the record. My concern during my opening statement that when you redact something, we should know what area it falls under. That you say will happen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Your March 24th letter indicated that some actions the special counsel investigated as potentially raising obstruction of justice concerns had not been publicly reported. Will these actions be identified in the report sent to Congress?
As things stand now, I don't think that they will be redacted, so they will be identifiable.
All right. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Satterhall.
Again, that was U.S. Attorney General William Barr testifying before Congress in his first public appearance since releasing his summary of the Robert Mueller Trump-Russia investigation. Moving on to some national news. An actress accused in the college admissions scandal agrees to plead guilty, and she has issued an apology. Attorney Ken Rothweiler joined Good Day Philadelphia this morning to discuss the case.
7:32, actress Felicity Huffman, 13 others pleading guilty to conspiracy and fraud in connection, of course, with the college admissions cheating scandal.
The plea agreement indicates prosecutors will seek a sentence of 4 to 10 months, and so far, actress Lori Loughlin has not agreed to the plea deal. But we want to bring in our legal analyst, Ken Rothweiler, and we want to start with Felicity Huffman. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Because she decided to plead guilty.
She did, and I think she did because while she could get 4 to 10 months, she's probably not going to get any time in jail.
Really?
Yeah, they'll probably have some type of supervised homestay. Not that she has to stay in her house, but she'll probably have to report into a probation office or something like that. I mean, I'd be completely surprised. I won't be surprised if some other people get some time. Now, Lori Loughlin, who gave $500,000, this bribe for $500,000.
And that's the difference with Felicity, who only gave $15,000. No criminal history here. Those are factors.
Those are factors. That's a big difference between the $15,000 and the $500,000, right? So she could spend up to 2 years in jail. So she's waiting this out, and her lawyers are probably talking to the prosecutors, probably trying to make a deal. I'd also be surprised if she spends any time in jail. Although this Rick Singer, who was the mastermind of the whole thing, to the tune of about $25 million that basically went from parents to coaches and so forth, I think he is absolutely going to spend time in jail and should.
So many questions here. First of all, I want to break down the charges, then I want to get back to Rick Singer here. So conspiracy to commit mail fraud and honest services mail fraud. What are those charges?
Honest services mail fraud. I actually never really heard of that before. It's a scheme to deprive another of the intangible right of honest services. So what does that mean? Basically means because of her conduct, Felicity Huffman's conduct, someone else who wanted to get honest services, that is, get their children into college, were deprived of it, because she did something fraudulent to deprive someone else of getting these honest services. So those two, they're both felonies, and they're, you know, it's interesting. Here's an interesting fact. Conspiracy to commit mail fraud, that goes back to 1872. The honest services mail fraud, that's a new law in 1988. So it's a fairly recent law. It's a difference of about 100 years in those two laws. I'm a lawyer, so I found this to be interesting. I know you guys weren't amazed that was interesting. I was actually kind of amazed.
It's amazing just what's on the books right now.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I want to read her statement, so I want to know your thoughts on this, and if maybe this will have any effect on what they end up deciding.
Okay.
She said, "I'm ashamed of the pain I've caused my daughter, my family, my friends, my colleagues, and the educational community. I want to apologize to them, and especially I want to apologize to the students who work hard every day to get into college, and to their parents who make tremendous sacrifices to support their children and do so honestly. My daughter absolutely knew nothing about my actions, and in my misguided and profoundly wrong way, I have betrayed her. This transgression toward her and the public I will carry for the rest of my life." I mean, she goes on, you know, also saying, hey, my daughter had nothing to do with this.
Well, in the court of public opinion, I think most people say, okay, those are just words, but it does make a difference actually inside the courtroom.
I think it absolutely does. I was kind of impressed with that statement.
Really?
She kind of hit all the marks.
Well, I'm sure she had people help her to get it together.
I'll tell you what I would do, though. I think going forward, the big question is, how do you prevent this in the future? Because this has been going on for decades and decades and decades. I think the only way you can stop this, and this is a harsh punishment, right, is to the children that got in as a result of that, they have to be removed from the school, in my view.
We're starting to see that happen.
Yeah. I think that at Stanford, they said that was going to happen. These other schools, USC, Yale, and Georgetown, same thing should happen.
We see any of these defendants, we talk about Rick Singer, the mastermind here, will any of them turn and testify against him?
I think they all will.
All will.
Yeah, I think they all. I think that's part of the deal. Probably with Felicia Hoffman was, getting. She plead out. I think part of the plea deal was probably you're going to testify. If we need you to testify. Remember, they have most of these people on audio tape. This investigation by the FBI. They have emails, they have text messages, and they have voice transmissions.
Well, it's a very detailed, Ken, investigation, as you know. Looking at the documents here, because I'm curious, with Felicity Huffman, her husband William H. Macy knew this was going on. Why hasn't he been charged?
I'm as confused as you are. I don't know. I've looked and looked to see why he wasn't charged as well, because you're right. It seems like he knew as well. Well, if he knew as well, then he should have been charged, also along with her. And I'm not really quite sure why. It'll probably come out, but as of right now, I really don't know.
Do you think it's because he didn't directly hand over the money or directly agree necessarily? Because we know that in the emails he was asking questions.
Right.
But when it comes to Lori Loughlin and her husband, he was like, hey, let's make this payment. I'll do this.
Maybe that's why. Maybe she actually made the payment. But he was in on it. I mean, he was in on the discussion. So, they both knew. So I'm a little bit confused about that.
Okay. We'll see where this goes. Yeah, up to 20 years for some individuals, possibly no jail time for others.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the court.
I know. That's crazy.
Always good to see you, Mike.
Good seeing you, too.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
And moving on to health news, more and more teens are turning to vape pens, and concerns are mounting. Why local doctors want parents to get involved now before it's too late. Dr. Robert Bassett of the Poison Control Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia joined Good Day Philadelphia this morning with more.
8:16, many first turned to e-cigarettes or vaping in an attempt to wean themselves off of traditional cigarettes. But it's become trendy and concerns really are mounting, especially as younger people are getting their hands on it. The FDA is currently investigating now a possible link between e-cigarettes and seizures in young people.
This is troubling. Dr. Robert Bassett of the Poison Control Center at Children's Hospital Philadelphia wants the public to know there has been a steady increase in the number of calls reporting young children sickened by e-cigarettes. Good morning to you, doctor.
Good morning.
This is more than sickened. We're talking about seizures here?
Yes.
How many cases?
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's one of the limitations, that we don't fully know the magnitude of the problem. At Poison Control, we collect data on this routinely, daily, in fact, and there's poison control centers around the country that are actively tracking this sort of stuff, but we rely on voluntary reporting to get that data. So sometimes just these little blips on our sort of surveillance are what really tip us off to the magnitude of it. So over the last 10 years, roughly, the FDA has identified at least 35 cases of seizure activity in cases of people that were exposed to e-cigarettes. I guess I'd like to be clear that they did a very meticulous job of not stating that this was clearly caused by the e-cigarettes, but there may be an association, and that requires some rigorous scientific investigation.
Could have been a contributing factor.
Absolutely, and I would tell you, if I'm honest, that from a toxicologist standpoint, we studied nicotine and other harmful chemicals for a very long time. And we know that nicotine in high doses and toxic doses can cause a variety of very harmful clinical symptoms, not the least of which is seizure, and including death. So I think if after study they sort of show that this was associated, and that's the conclusion, I don't think many of us would be surprised.
And even though people wouldn't be surprised, though, isn't it always an extra concern when it's someone who's younger?
Absolutely. And I think, I will tell you this from a personal place of empathy. I'm the father of a young child, and I feel that the consequences have gone up greatly for me when it comes to sort of the public health impact when we're talking about the potential for products being exposed to children at a younger age. Their developing minds are at higher risk for adverse effects than the fully formed adult mind. And we do know statistically that children that are exposed to addictive substances while their mind's developing are more likely to carry that addiction later into life.
This is very similar to alcohol poisoning. We've seen this with alcohol leading to seizures. Could this be, is it the vaping, is it inhaling, or is it swallowing liquids?
Well, you bring up a good question. So I think there are two patient populations as a toxicologist I'm particularly concerned about. The vast majority of the people that you see on the street that are using e-cigarettes are doing an inhalational form, the so-called vaping, if you will. And one of the problems that we know is that when you're using liquid nicotine, the concentrations of these products are much higher than what we think of for traditional tobacco products. So they are getting themselves, the intentional user, a lot more nicotine than historically people were when they used tobacco. But the other corollary, and this to your point about ingestions, are the vulnerable populations that never intended to get exposed to nicotine. And those are the curious children that can just walk into a house and pick up a bottle.
But it's kind of interesting when you say that they were never intended to get it. When you look at bottles nowadays and they have like characters on it and the bright colors, and it would be all the things you'd think that would make a kid want to try it.
It's almost like we set that up. That is exactly a great segue to one of our messages, is that, You know, when we talk about regulation, and I know that sometimes regulation carries a bad connotation, but I do think that this comes from a place of public protection, and that we need to be able to restrict access to potentially harmful substances, toxic substances. I think that that's the public trust, is to be able to walk in to a commercial place of business and expect to not be exposed to these things. And then,
as you're talking, I just want to make sure we're also getting a shot, because we have some of these items that he's referring to on the counter here. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then to your point, that there's a real concern with the potential for direct-to child consumer marketing. And
I mean, look at this one right here. I mean, it's just cookie right there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like Oreos or something.
Yeah, absolutely. They smell sweet. They look desirable. This one is a latte like product. The smallest one that you see in front is actually cotton candy flavor. And when you smell these, they smell sweet. They're visually appealing. They're attractive. So although we've made small strides in terms of child protective packaging, this is still very attractive to little kids.
So bottom line, I'm sitting real quick in your office. We're having a conversation. I use these e-cigarettes, these vaping devices. What do you tell me?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think, you know, this is a very complex problem, and I think it's going to require complex solutions. And one thing that's a little known fact is that a lot of the makers of e-cigarettes are actually owned by large tobacco firms. And I assure you, I promise you, they are pouring tons and tons of money and resources into getting their message out and doing their marketing. And I think that we have an obligation to counterbalance that. And a big part of that is education. And we have to hit them with everything we've got. We got to hit them low, we got to hit them with the high, we got to bring to bear all the resources to make sure that the individual consumer is informed when they're making these decisions. And
there's a lot we just don't know.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank
appreciate
you.
it. Dr.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to take.
And more on Good Day Philadelphia this morning. Marissa McClellan is the author of The Food in Jars Kitchen. And this morning she joined us to show how to take your toast game up a notch using some rather unique combinations.
Well, we know that avocado toast is all the rage. But if you want something different but you don't know where to start, why don't you pay attention to this?
We're moving on. Marissa McClellan, the author of The Food in Jars Kitchen, is joining us this morning. How to take your toast game, well, to a whole nother level. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
I'm just now catching up with avocado toast, but that's so yesterday, right?
All right, yeah, we're moving on. Moving on from avocado toast this morning.
So you were basically a specialist, because we talked about your book and how it's called The Food in Jars Kitchen, and that's because you believe in using a lot of preserving stuff yourself and putting it together and using that for your recipes.
Absolutely. So this book is all about taking things out of the jar, transforming them, and toast is a great way to do that. And we think about putting jam on toast. We don't necessarily think about putting like ricotta and pesto and pickled snap peas on toast.
Oh, is that what you have here?
That's what I've got right there. So that's our first toast, and that's a great one. You can put any pickle on there, but I love just a quick pickled snap pea, because
pickled snap peas.
Pickled snap pea. You know those snap peas that you get at like a Chinese restaurant? I just slice those up and put them in a little brine and pickle them up.
Wow, this is so great because we have so many great local farmers.
It's
farms
true.
around here.
You go to Lancaster County?
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as I love to support our local farmers that come into the city. I go to the farmers markets because we have so much great stuff here.
Okay, let's get to our next toast.
So this might look like avocado, but it does, but it's actually a mashed garlicky and lemon pea spread.
Ooh.
So it's like just a spring pea. I actually just used frozen peas and then some pickled red onions and some chopped toasted almonds on there. And that one's great because it's vegan. So it's totally plant-based, and it's a really great way to get the brightness from the onions and the creaminess from the peas.
You smash the peas, put it right there on the toast. This is your fourth book.
Yes.
Where does your passion for food come from?
I have always just loved cooking and sharing it. And there's no better way to do that than with a cookbook, where you can really take what you're doing in your kitchen and share it with other
One
people.
thing I love about your book is because we've kind of evolved in the kitchen too. Our kitchens are getting a little smaller.
Yeah.
And that really helps us out there.
Absolutely.
Some of the recipes inside. All right, we're going to do it yourself kind of
Yeah,
creation
we've got
here.
one more to go. So this is just a piece of toasted sourdough. And then what I have here is a combination of whipped goat cheese and cream cheese. So the goat cheese gives it a little bit of bite and tang, but the cream cheese makes it smooth and spreadable. So we've got that. And then we just, to that, spoon this. This is roasted strawberries with a little bit of balsamic and honey. So we just spoon this over the top, and it looks pretty and it tastes even better.
You can smell it. It smells nice and sweet.
It does. And then because I always like to have a third thing on toast, whether it's, we've got a couple different things over there.
It's all about thyme.
Yeah, so just a little fresh thyme gives it a little bit of an herbal flavor, but it doesn't overpower it. And then there you go.
What flavor does thyme give you?
It's sort of a woody, but kind of fresh, I feel like.
And so 3 is the magic number then for you when it comes to toast?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to cut this. If you guys want to taste it, we can cut this and you can have a little bite. It might be messy though. So.
While we do that, take us through your latest book here, what we can see inside.
So the new book, The Food in Jars Kitchen, is everything from breakfast dishes and baked goods to dinner things, salads, vinaigrettes, even cocktails and popsicles.
Ooh,
so
love to hear that.
Every hour of the day, there's something there for you.
And just in time for summer, we see a lot of sauces.
Yeah.
A lot of marinades, including what you
Exactly.
can just take from your jar inside your kitchen and refrigerator.
Yeah, so I'm really excited
This is a good
about this
combination.
book. You like it?
It's very good, very good. And I know how Thomas mentioned that you have several books. So basically, you're going to take people through a journey when it comes to preserving.
Exactly.
I love that because you open up your fridge sometimes and you're staring at all the jars. You're like, what can I create?
Exactly. Well, and to use this book, you don't have to make your own preserves either. It can be things you bought at the farmer's market or you picked up from a friend. They said, hey, I made something this summer, let me give it to you. Or even what you got at the grocery store. It's really just about using the condiments and the preserves.
I can call it my good friend Welch's.
Yes, exactly. They make some good stuff.
Good to
Thank
see you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29 News Now. Catch us again tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 a.m. And be sure to follow Fox 29 on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the fox29.com site. And we'll see you soon.